I get a lot of questions emailed to me about the LSAT, which is not that surprising since I run an entire website devoted to it. But I thought it would be fun to do something a little bit different today and see what artificial intelligence thinks about the LSAT, what questions the hive mind has put together and put out there for us to look at. So I'm here on Google, maybe you've heard of it, and I thought it'd be fun to just go through the who, what, when, where, why, and how of the LSAT. Again, the who, what, when, where, why, the basics, the overview. So let's type it in and see what happens. Who LSAT? LSAT, who can take it? Pretty much anybody in a part of the world where the LSAT is offered. And it's offered in North America, Australia, Europe, China, a handful of other countries. I know that it's used for admission to law schools in North America, to law schools in Australia, India, a little bit in China. There's also the common law admission test, which is a competitor to the LSAT in certain countries overseas. But if you're applying to law school, at least in North America, then you will almost certainly be taking it, and you will have the opportunity to take it several times a year. Who writes LSAT questions? Who makes LSAT questions? That's kind of interesting, actually. There are a lot of former philosophy PhDs. Well, I guess they're currently philosophy PhDs, but maybe they're not actively professors or they're doing this on the side, but they are wordsmiths. They are experts at language and constructing difficult, complex passages. I actually am friends with a former writer of actual LSAT questions. He doesn't do it anymore, but that allows him a certain freedom to speak about the question writing process. And I've conducted a series of interviews with him that I will link to below this video if you'd like to hear what he has to say directly from him. So that's who LSAT. Let's see, next is what LSAT. What LSAT score do I need for a wide variety of law schools? Well, it varies, of course, and nobody really knows exactly what score you will need. In part, that comes down to what your GPA is and what your academic record is like. There's also your letters of recommendation, your personal statement, but yes, of course, the LSAT score is the biggest factor. LSAC has a handy tool that will show you how you stack up with different LSATs and GPAs relative to the median of entering classes, as well as the 25th and 75th percentile scores. There's also lawschoolnumbers.com, which has student submitted information. It's not vetted or anything, but most people probably aren't lying on there. So that those sites should answer your questions about what score you need. Ultimately, of course, the higher the better. If you're shooting for top 14, you ideally want in the 170s, although the high 160s might do it too. Next, let's look at where LSAT. Where to start? I would start with actual LSAT prep tests and having a regimented study schedule. I've put together a lot of different study schedules on my website. I have free month-by-month ones and week-by-week ones, and then I have premium day-by-day ones that break down for you exactly what to do every single day over the entire course of your prep. You want to start by building the foundation first, then move on to pacing as you do individual time sections, and finally bring it all together with full-length 5-section exams to build your endurance. So I'll link to those study schedules below as well, but you really just want to start with actual LSAT prep tests, none of the fake stuff, and then having a regimented plan that leads you to a situation where you no longer have to ask that question, where do I start, what do I do? You'll know because the study schedule lays it out for you. Where to take the LSAT? There are different test centers that LSAC puts out there for different test administrations. It could be at a local law school, it could be at a local university, or even a high school. It really varies. LSAC rents out space as they can, where they can. Here in New York City, Pace University has a test center, Fordham has a test center, Columbia has a test center. Then there are also some random high schools in the outer boroughs that offer the LSAT as well. So lots of different places. Where are LSAT scores posted? LSAT scores are posted on LSAC's website. They're released typically 2 to 3 weeks after the official LSAT test date. LSAC will thoroughly vet the questions in order to see whether they are valid, whether they performed as expected, and help them to separate people accurately along that 120 to 180 band. So that's where to get LSAT prep tests, where to buy LSAT prep books. Amazon's your best bet. They're probably the cheapest and the fastest for shipping. LSAC used to sell them through their website, but I don't think they necessarily had the bandwidth to ship them out. So they no longer sell them, but Amazon and your local bookstore will typically have them. Your local bookstore obviously is more limited in its offerings and may not have the newest exams. Where to sell LSAT books? Again, probably Amazon. There's also Craigslist. You could also give them to a friend, post on a message board online. There's a lot of different places. And if they're written in, they may not have the same resale value, of course. Anyway, so that's where LSAT, who, what, when, where, why. Why the LSAT? So why is the LSAT so hard? It's hard because law school is hard and they want to make sure that you're up to the challenge. But it's also hard because maybe you haven't learned it thoroughly. Maybe you haven't spent enough time. Most students typically spend 2 to 3 months studying for the LSAT, when in reality, it takes much longer to thoroughly master the LSAT. It's kind of like learning a foreign language, especially the logic game section, but the logical reasoning and reading comp sections as well. They have a very particular style and they require a very regimented way of thinking that you may not be accustomed to, and it takes time to build those habits. So while it's hard at first, it ultimately doesn't necessarily have to be that hard in the end. And one way you go from making it hard to easy is by, again, using a study schedule, building your foundation first, then working on pacing and endurance as you bring it all together. Why would you take the LSAT? You take the LSAT if you want to go to law school. Of course, some law schools are taking the GRE now, but I don't necessarily think they're accepting that many applicants with the GRE. And if you already have an LSAT score on record, they're going to factor that into their consideration of you, and you're better off, of course, getting the highest score possible. You take the LSAT to show that you're serious about law school, and you also take it to prove to yourself that you have what it takes. LSAT scores are strongly correlated with 1L grades, and not everyone wants to hear this. This is a little bit of tough love from me, but if you can't break a 150 on the LSAT, you probably shouldn't be going to law school. And the reason for that is you probably won't do that well in 1L, and you might not pass the bar. If you take the LSAT and do well, it proves that you have the reasoning abilities and you have what it takes to prepare yourself for something that's excruciatingly difficult and sit there for several hours demonstrating your mastery of it. And then that you can also develop that regimented way of thinking, that very legalistic way of thinking, where you can go from taking abstract legal principles and applying them to real world factual situations, which is in a way part of what you're doing on the LSAT as well. Why would you cancel your LSAT score? You probably shouldn't. Most people should not cancel the LSAT. And the reason is that law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only consider the highest LSAT score, and there are good reasons for this. One of them is that US news rankings only factor in the highest, and so that's all they have incentive to do. But another consideration is that a lot of people take the LSAT as a diagnostic just to see how they'll do, and of course, surprise, surprise, they don't do well. So it would be unfair to have you take the LSAT with no prep, get a 150, then study a lot, get a 170, and have them only average that 160 score. A lot of pre-law advisors are under the misconception that law schools still average multiple scores when they haven't done so for over 10 years now, and they give that outdated bad advice to current applicants, and it would be unfair to penalize them. So law schools don't average multiple scores, and the only reason you would really ever want to cancel is if something went astronomically wrong on test day, something totally out of the blue, like the fire alarm went off, the person behind you puked on you or something, or you just totally fumbled. But if you maybe just had some more trouble than average, or maybe got a game wrong or a passage wrong, that isn't necessarily sufficient reason to cancel your score. So I would really recommend against it in most cases. Why are logic games on the LSAT? I honestly don't know why they're on the LSAT. I think that LSAC, over a period of several decades, starting in 1948, they experimented with a wide variety of formats for the exam and ultimately settled on this one. But I think this current formulation of the LSAT that started in 1991 has merit. A lot of it involves making deductions, making inferences, and testing what you actually can logically derive from a set of facts versus what you might assume unwarranted about that set of facts based upon that set of facts. And logical reasoning and reading comp sections, of course, involve more language, and maybe they appear to be more similar to what law school and the practice of law will actually be like than the games section. But I think the games section, in a way, adds something unique. A lot of times we take abstract text and we summarize it. We might even form diagrams or symbols based on that text just to boil it down for ourselves. And logic games give us a very concrete situation where we can do that. In law school, you'll often be dealing with real-world situations that involve a variety of different actors, and your job is to see how they all interact with each other, how you deal with all those moving pieces. And I think that logic games relate a lot to that. So that's the why. But when we're why, how? How is the last one. How long is the LSAT? It's about 3 to 4 hours altogether based on how long they take to get everything set up. You're dealing with 5 35-minute sections. And of course, you could do the math putting all that together. Then there also is the writing sample and the break. So that is a minimum of how long you'll be there. But you'll also have a half hour or so to bubble in basics like your name and your address. So that also takes some time. And then if the proctors don't know what they're doing or they can't find the booklets or something, believe it or not, this actually happens, then you'll be there even longer. So all said and done, you might be there for maybe 4 hours on average. So I would definitely eat a good sized meal beforehand. Typically it's offered in the morning, so you'd be eating breakfast beforehand. Don't eat so much that you're going to fall into a food coma, but also don't eat so little that you'll be hungry. How hard is the LSAT? Pretty hard. I would say for most people, it took me over a year of difficult, excruciating struggle before I was able to improve to a 175. So I would say it's hard for the average person. There are a handful of natural born geniuses out there who just look at it and get in the 170s off the bat. I had a roommate like that. It was really frustrating, but that's the deal. How to study, again, real LSAT prep tests, that's the best material. And then struggling with the problems on your own, resorting to explanations only as a last resort, and really just putting in the time using a regimented study plan. How long to study? Most people spend 2 to 3 months. I would actually recommend closer to 5 to 6 on average. That's where I see students achieving their fullest potential. And if you have longer than that, awesome. Definitely use that time, take advantage of it. The LSAT is worth it. You spend at least typically 3 to 4 years on undergrad, and all of that culminates in a single GPA. But the LSAT, which is typically weighted more, all rests on a single half a day, again, 3 to 4 hours maybe. So it's worth investing several months to get the highest LSAT score possible if you're spending 3 to 4 years to get the best GPA possible. So it really is putting in the time. Anyway, I know that there's plenty more Google searches I could analyze, plenty more results to look at, but I'll leave off here for now. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe to be notified of new videos as I release them. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions at all so I can answer those and not random Google searches. Anyway, in the meantime, I'll wish you all the best.